He was just 7 years old when the piano became more than just an instrument for him. To everyone who knew him, it seemed ordinary at first. A child tinkering on a keyboard, pressing keys, making sounds that filled a small living room. But there was something different in the way he approached the piano. He didn't just play notes. He seemed to understand them, as if they spoke to him and he answered. His parents watched him in awe, never expecting that this casual interest would turn into something extraordinary. It all started one rainy afternoon. He had wandered into the living room while his mother was tidying up and saw the old piano standing against the wall. Dust covered the keys and the pedals looked worn, but he was drawn to it. He sat down and began pressing keys one after the other. At first it was random, a child's curiosity leading him from one sound to another. But soon something remarkable happened. He began to find patterns. He matched sounds that felt right together, as if he could hear melodies in his head that he needed to play out. His mother, quietly watching from the doorway, felt a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Word spread quickly within the family about this little boy who could play songs he had never heard before. His grandmother came to visit and listened as he played simple melodies that sounded far beyond his age. She brought sheet music, thinking he could follow it, but he surprised everyone by improvising. He didn't need instructions. He seemed to know exactly how to make the piano sing. This natural ability was rare, something the family didn't fully understand but instinctively knew was special. By the next month, his parents decided to find a piano teacher. They wanted someone who could nurture his talent, guide him properly, and help him grow. They found a teacher who had years of experience with young students, someone who had trained children who went on to win local competitions. The teacher was impressed from the very first lesson. Unlike most children who needed patience and repetition, he picked up techniques almost instantly. He listened carefully, followed instructions, and yet, when given the freedom, created music that made the teacher stop and listen. It was as if the child could communicate with the piano in a way that adults often struggled to achieve. At home, the piano became a center of life. He would sit for hours, sometimes losing track of time entirely. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner could pass by without him noticing if he was in the middle of a new piece. The family began to realize that his world was now intertwined with the piano, and they felt proud but also a hint of concern. Could a child really spend so much time in front of an instrument without losing balance in life? At this stage, though, the wonder of his skill overshadowed any worry. Every note he played seemed to hold magic. Every chord resonated with emotion. Soon he began performing in small gatherings. Family, friends, neighbors, and local community members were invited to watch him play. Each time he performed, people were struck by his ability. Even adults who had studied music could not explain how a child could produce such emotion, precision, and understanding. It was beyond technical skill. It was intuition. Observers often found themselves leaning closer, mesmerized by the delicate balance between control and feeling in his music. With attention came opportunity. Invitations to play at local events started to arrive. Teachers and parents realized that if nurtured properly, his talent could take him far. Competitions were suggested, auditions were arranged, and soon he was performing in front of judges who were accustomed to seeing children with musical promise. Their reactions were often a mix of surprise and admiration. Some judges whispered to each other, noting that his level of skill was rarely seen at his age. Each performance built his reputation, and the idea of being a child prodigy started to form around him. However, even in these early stages, signs of strain appeared. Hours of practice meant less time for play, less time for friends. When he did interact with other children, he sometimes seemed distant, as if his mind was always on the piano. Teachers would sometimes comment on his intense focus, suggesting that it was both a gift and a challenge. At first, his parents didn't fully understand what this meant. They were proud, naturally, and they celebrated every achievement. But quietly, they wondered if their son's childhood was slipping away, replaced by the demands of perfection. His first formal recital came at the age of 8. The hall was packed with parents, family members, and music enthusiasts. He sat on the bench, tiny hands hovering over the keys, and began to play. From the first note, the audience was captivated. Every phrase he played was measured yet filled with feeling. When he reached the final note, there was silence, a collective breath held in awe before the applause erupted. Tears formed in the eyes of some, while others whispered about the unusual depth coming from someone so young. For the child, the applause was exciting but also a little overwhelming. He didn't fully understand why people reacted so strongly, only that he loved to play, and the piano felt like an extension of himself. In private, though, the child began to sense a difference between himself and other kids. He noticed that he practiced while his peers played outside. He saw friends getting scolded for staying indoors, while he received encouragement to spend more time at the piano. There was pride in their eyes, but there was also an expectation. He could feel it in the way teachers and parents spoke to him, in the subtle reminders that he was talented, that people expected him to succeed. It wasn't a harsh expectation, not yet, but it was there like a shadow behind every compliment. The teacher who guided him began to introduce more complex techniques. Classical pieces that would challenge adults were now given to him to practice. At first he struggled, but his determination was unusual for a child. Late nights and early mornings blended together as he worked tirelessly to master each note, each phrase. There were moments of frustration when his small hands could not reach the keys perfectly, or when a chord felt impossible to play, but the fire in him never faded. The piano had become a place where he could express everything he couldn't yet put into words. He could tell stories, convey sadness, joy, longing, and hope all through the keys. As the months passed, his reputation grew beyond his local community. Invitations to larger events, more prestigious recitals, and even television appearances began to trickle in. Adults who watched him play often found themselves speechless. They noted his perfect timing, his emotional depth, and a presence on the stage that was far beyond his years. Friends in school, classmates, and even some teachers began to see him as someone special, someone different. And while he received praise, he also began to notice a subtle separation. People admired him, but he was aware that they didn't truly understand the effort, the focus, and the sacrifice behind every performance. During this period, the child's life was a mixture of wonder and challenge. He loved the piano, loved the feeling of creating music that moved people, and yet he sometimes felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Even small mistakes during practice could feel like failures. His parents, sensing both pride and concern, tried to balance encouragement with gentle reminders to rest, to play outside, to be a child. But the child was often too absorbed in his music to pay much attention to anything else. Evenings at home were quiet, mostly filled with music. Sometimes the parents would watch from another room, listening as he practiced new pieces or improvised melodies. There was a beauty in those moments, a sense of something rare and precious happening in front of their eyes. But they also noticed the intensity, the way he became absorbed, almost obsessed with perfecting each note. They began to understand that being gifted was not always easy. There was a price to pay, even at a young age, for the brilliance that came so naturally to him. By the end of the first year of formal training, the child had performed in several recitals, competed in local contests, and even won some awards. Every success added to his confidence but also increased the invisible pressure. Teachers would gently, sometimes not so gently, remind him that talent alone was not enough. Hard work and discipline were required. While these words were meant to guide him, he sometimes felt them as weighty expectations. He was learning that being gifted meant more than enjoying music. It meant responsibility, attention, and effort that few children understood. Despite all of this, the joy of playing never left him. There were moments when he would sit at the piano simply to feel the sound beneath his fingers, without thinking about competitions or applause. These moments were sacred. In those times he was just a child, playing because it made him happy, because it felt right. It was in these small pockets of freedom that he remembered why he loved music so deeply, and why the piano had become his closest companion. As the first part of his journey came to a close, the family began to see both the promise and the potential challenges ahead. They were proud beyond words, but increasingly aware that nurturing such talent came with its own complexities. The child, for his part, remained mostly unaware of the long path before him. For now, the piano was his world, and he was ready to explore it with passion, curiosity, and a heart that had already begun to beat in time with the music. It was the start of something extraordinary, something that would test him in ways no one could predict, but also something that held the potential to touch lives far beyond his own. As the months passed, the child's life became a rhythm of practice, study, and performance. Each day began early, with exercises that strengthened fingers and taught precision. At first it felt like play, but slowly the hours grew longer, more focused and more demanding. There were scales to master, pieces to perfect, and techniques to learn that even adults found difficult. The child approached each task with determination, but the intensity began to weigh on him in ways that were not immediately obvious to the adults around him. His teacher was strict but respected. She expected perfection, yet she also pushed the child to express emotion through music. Every note had to be clear, every passage played with accuracy, but within that accuracy the soul of the music had to shine. She praised effort, but criticism often came sharply, a reminder that talent alone was not enough. At first, the child welcomed these lessons, feeling proud each time he improved. But over time, the corrections began to pile, and the weight of expectation began to press on his small shoulders. Practice sessions at home grew longer. The child would sit for hours, repeating the same passage over and over, sometimes until his fingers ached. Meals were occasionally interrupted and playtime became rare. His friends from school noticed he could not join them for games or outings. Invitations to birthday parties were often declined because he had a recital or a practice session. While he never complained, the absence of ordinary childhood experiences created a quiet sadness, a sense of missing out on things other children enjoyed. Sometimes he felt isolated, trapped in a world where only music existed. Despite this, his talent blossomed. Each performance, whether in class, at local competitions, or at small recitals, showed improvement. Judges and audiences remarked on his precision, clarity, and expressiveness. His parents were filled with pride, sometimes unable to believe how far he had come in such a short time. Yet with every praise came a subtle pressure, the idea that he must continue to be exceptional, that mistakes were unacceptable. They wanted him to succeed and he wanted to make them proud, so he pushed himself harder. The competitions were a turning point. In some he excelled effortlessly, leaving audiences amazed. In others, even a small error could unsettle him. The child had never before felt the sting of failure in front of an audience, and it hurt deeply. He became aware that people were watching, expecting brilliance, and that one small slip could change how they perceived him. The joy of playing began to mingle with fear, and the piano, once a place of freedom, sometimes became a source of stress. At home, the family tried to maintain a balance. They encouraged him to take breaks, to play outside occasionally, and to spend time with friends. But the child's dedication often outweighed their guidance. He was drawn to the piano, unable to resist the allure of new challenges, new pieces, and new skills to master. In quiet moments, he would reflect on how different his life was compared to his classmates, feeling both pride and a strange emptiness. He loved music, yet he missed the simplicity of being a child. The teacher introduced more demanding pieces, compositions that required not only technical skill but emotional depth. He practiced tirelessly, determined to meet her expectations. Sometimes, late at night, he would play in solitude, discovering the subtleties of a piece on his own. These moments were precious, and they reminded him of why he loved music. But they were also a reminder of the effort required, of the long path ahead. The child was learning that talent came with responsibility, and responsibility demanded sacrifice. Outside the piano, life became more complicated. Schoolwork was often rushed or overlooked because of practice and performances. Friends would ask him to join games or outings, but he declined politely, feeling torn between his obligations and the desire for normal experiences. Occasionally, he would feel jealousy or sadness, watching peers enjoy freedom while he remained bound to routines that others could not understand. It was a quiet struggle, one he rarely voiced because he felt that his talent demanded dedication above all else. Even in competitions, pressure was constant. Judges' remarks were scrutinized, and while praise was satisfying, criticism left a deep mark. The child sometimes replayed mistakes in his mind, obsessing over details that adults might consider trivial. Nights were restless with thoughts of improvement, fear of failure, and the desire to meet expectations. Parents noticed the tension in his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes, and tried to offer comfort, but words could not ease the weight he carried. At times, the teacher would speak candidly about the realities of being a prodigy. She mentioned stories of children who burned out, whose talent faded under pressure, or who became frustrated and quit. These stories were meant as guidance, yet they also planted seeds of anxiety. The child listened carefully, internalizing her words. He understood that being gifted was not just a blessing. it carried a hidden cost. Each day of practice, each performance was part of a larger journey that demanded focus, resilience, and emotional strength. The social side of life became increasingly difficult. He longed for connection, for friendship, and for the simple pleasures of childhood. Yet he also loved the piano too much to step away for long. The balance between personal happiness and dedication to music was delicate, and often the child felt torn. He learned to compartmentalize his feelings, to push sadness aside, and to immerse himself in the discipline required. His family recognized the challenges, offering support and encouragement whenever possible, but they could not fully shield him from the pressures of expectation. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling practice, the child sat quietly, hands resting on the keys but not playing. Tears came without warning, a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and longing. The piano, once a source of joy, had become a reminder of the demands he faced. His parents entered the room gently, noticing his distress. They offered comfort, reassurance, and understanding. It was a rare moment when the child allowed himself to be vulnerable, and it reminded them all that even prodigies were still children, with emotions and needs beyond talent. Over time, these moments became more frequent, a silent struggle that accompanied his remarkable skill. He continued to improve, each day adding new techniques and deepening his understanding of music. But the emotional toll was becoming evident. Parents and teachers began to discuss strategies to help him manage pressure, suggesting breaks, lighter schedules, and moments of play. The child, though reluctant to slow down, began to appreciate these pauses, finding relief in small joys beyond the piano. Despite these challenges, there were triumphs that renewed his spirit. Successful performances, moments of improvisation, and the admiration of audiences reminded him why he loved music. These successes balanced the pressures, offering a glimpse of hope and joy. He was learning to navigate the complex world of talent, expectation, and personal growth, finding resilience in the midst of challenge. The piano remained his sanctuary, a place where he could express himself fully, even when the world outside felt demanding. His parents reflected often on the journey. They were proud, deeply proud, yet aware that the path was not without risks. They wanted their child to shine, but they also wanted him to remain healthy, happy, and balanced. The delicate dance between nurturing talent and protecting childhood became a daily concern. They observed the signs of stress, the intensity of focus, and the moments of vulnerability, striving to support him without stifling his growth. The teacher continued to push the child toward excellence, but with increasing awareness of his limits. She recognized that talent alone could not sustain success. Emotional well-being was equally important. Together, they worked to find a rhythm that allowed for both development and self-care. The child, though still intensely dedicated, began to understand that his journey was not only about skill but also about balance. Music remained his passion, but he learned that caring for himself was part of being a true artist. As the second part of his journey unfolded, the child stood at a crossroads between joy and pressure, freedom and expectation. His talent continued to shine, drawing attention and admiration, yet he was learning the complexities of life as a prodigy. Each day brought new lessons, challenges, and victories, shaping not only his skill but his character. He was beginning to understand that the world of music was beautiful, demanding, and sometimes harsh, but it was also a place where his voice could grow and flourish. In quiet moments, when he sat alone at the piano, he remembered why he started playing in the first place. The love for sound, for melody, for expression remained untouched by pressure or expectation. It was a reminder that talent, while extraordinary, needed nurturing not only through practice but also through care, understanding, and the simple joys of being a child. And with that understanding, he continued his journey, aware that the path ahead would be challenging, but also filled with promise and the possibility of discovering the full depth of his gift. The child's life had become a mixture of awe and pressure, of music and expectation. By now, he had gained recognition beyond his small community. Local competitions were no longer enough. Invitations to larger events, sometimes in cities far away, began to arrive. With these opportunities came excitement, but also the subtle weight of responsibility. People expected brilliance from him, and the child, though young, was aware that every performance carried an unspoken demand for perfection. Traveling for recitals became a regular part of life. Hours in cars or trains, waiting in backstage rooms and preparing for performances taught him patience, but also drained energy that other children used for play. He observed older students who had been through similar experiences, noting the mix of confidence and stress in their eyes. It was a glimpse of the larger world he was entering, one where talent was celebrated, but often at the cost of childhood simplicity. The teacher's expectations increased. Not only did she want him to play technically perfect, but she demanded emotional depth in every piece. Each note, each pause, each phrase needed meaning. The child spent hours trying to feel the music in ways he could not always understand. There were days when frustration overtook joy, when a perfect piece felt like an unreachable goal. His teacher, firm yet caring, reminded him that mastery required persistence and patience. Sometimes her words, meant to guide, felt like pressure, and he struggled silently, balancing love for music with fear of disappointment. Back home, the family noticed changes in his behavior. Laughter and play were less frequent. He would sometimes retreat to the piano even after a long day, finding comfort in the familiar sounds and patterns. Parents grew concerned as they saw the signs of stress: tight shoulders, quiet sighs, and occasional tears after practice. They encouraged him to take breaks, to rest, and to spend time with friends, but he often resisted, feeling that slowing down was a luxury he could not afford. Music had become both a sanctuary and a challenge, a place of joy and pressure. The child also began to notice differences between himself and other children his age. While classmates played video games, rode bikes, or laughed together during recess, he was often at the piano or at a lesson. Invitations to birthdays or outings were politely declined, not out of dislike for others, but because he felt bound to obligations he could not ignore. Loneliness occasionally visited him, a quiet ache he did not fully understand. He longed for companionship but feared losing the precious time required for improvement. Competitions brought new experiences and new pressures. Judges were often impressed by his skill, yet even small imperfections caused him to question himself deeply. In one event, a missed note during a fast passage haunted him long after the performance ended. He replayed it in his mind, imagining every variation, every correction. Sleep became restless on nights before competitions, filled with thoughts of practice, timing, and control. His parents watched, offering comfort, but they could not lift the invisible burden he carried. Other prodigies appeared on the scene, children with similar skills, similar ambitions. They were peers and competitors at the same time. The child watched them with curiosity and sometimes envy. Some seemed to handle the pressure effortlessly, while others, like him, felt the strain. Conversations with his teacher revealed the truth. Being gifted was rare, but surviving the world of high expectations required resilience. The child began to understand that talent alone could not carry him. Emotional strength was equally necessary. During this time, the teacher shared stories of young musicians who had burned out or abandoned music altogether. These tales were cautionary, but they also scared the child. He wondered if he was heading toward the same path. Could his love for the piano endure the constant practice, the relentless pursuit of perfection, and the scrutiny of audiences and judges? He felt a mix of determination and fear. The piano was his passion, but he realized that the journey ahead would test him in ways he had not yet experienced. The intensity of training began to affect his health. Fingers would ache after long sessions, and fatigue sometimes blurred his focus. His parents monitored him closely, urging him to rest and eat properly, but the child was so absorbed that he often ignored their advice. They tried to instill routines that included breaks, proper posture, and relaxation, but it was a delicate balance. He understood the need for care, yet the desire to excel always pulled him back to the piano. Social experiences became even more limited. He attended school, but often his mind was on the next performance, the next piece to learn, or the corrections from his teacher. Friends began to notice his absence in group activities and play, but he could not always explain why he needed to prioritize music. The child felt a quiet tension between two worlds, the world of a normal child and the demanding realm of a prodigy. It was a delicate balance he navigated daily, often silently. Despite these challenges, there were moments of pure joy. When he played music freely, without an audience or judgment, he felt a connection to the piano that was almost magical. Improvisation became his escape, a way to express emotions that words could not capture. These private moments reminded him why he began playing in the first place, rekindling his love for music. Even in the midst of competition and pressure, He clung to these fleeting experiences, finding solace in the sound of the keys beneath his fingers. A particularly challenging competition tested him further. He was required to perform a complex piece that demanded not only technical skill, but profound emotional interpretation. The hours of preparation were exhausting, filled with practice, corrections, and self-reflection. On the day of the performance, he felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Backstage, he observed other talented children, some confident, some nervous, all aware of the stakes. When it was his turn, he sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and let the music flow. Every note carried effort, emotion, and a piece of his soul. The audience was captivated, and the applause was thunderous. Yet in the quiet of his heart, he knew that each performance was both a triumph and a challenge, a reminder that talent required continual work and perseverance. After the event, the child experienced a range of emotions. Pride mingled with exhaustion, joy with tension. The teacher praised his performance, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. The child listened carefully, internalizing every word. He was beginning to understand that mastery was a lifelong journey, that even prodigies faced challenges beyond technical skill. Each success brought new expectations, new opportunities, and new pressures. The world of music was not simply about talent. It was about resilience, patience, and emotional depth. Home life remained a sanctuary, though it was now intertwined with the realities of his growing reputation. Parents and family members offered support, comfort, and understanding, but they could not fully shield him from the demands of his talent. They tried to maintain a balance, encouraging him to rest and play, but they also recognized the unique path he was on. The child learned to accept both support and solitude, finding moments of peace in the familiar presence of the piano. During lessons, the teacher continued to push boundaries, introducing new techniques and more challenging compositions. The child absorbed everything eagerly, yet sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of learning required. Mistakes were inevitable, and each one carried a weight that was both instructional and emotional. The teacher guided him patiently, offering both encouragement and correction, helping him navigate the fine line between challenge and frustration. The child also began to develop a deeper understanding of music itself. He noticed subtleties in rhythm, tone, and expression that most adults overlooked. He experimented with dynamics, tempo, and emotion, exploring ways to make each piece uniquely his own. These explorations were deeply personal, a means of connecting with music beyond technical skill. In these moments, he felt both freedom and responsibility, realizing that his talent was a gift but also a commitment. Despite growing recognition, the child faced moments of self-doubt. He questioned whether he was progressing fast enough, whether audiences and teachers expected too much, and whether he could maintain his love for music amid the pressures. These feelings were normal, but for a child so young, they were intense. He learned to manage them quietly, relying on the support of family, the guidance of his teacher, and the solace of the piano itself. The journey was becoming as much about emotional growth as musical skill. Friendships were complicated. Other children admired his talent, but some felt intimidated or envious. The child sometimes felt isolated, unable to share experiences fully with peers who did not understand the demands of being a prodigy. Yet he also found companionship in fellow musicians who faced similar challenges. They shared stories of practice, performance, and perseverance, forming a subtle network of understanding and support. In these relationships, he began to see that talent could connect people, even across age and experience. Traveling for performances exposed him to different cultures and audiences. He observed how music could move people in ways words could not. From quiet halls to bustling concert venues, each experience taught him about the universality of sound and emotion. Yet every trip also reminded him of the demands placed on his young shoulders. Time zones, unfamiliar environments, and long hours of practice challenged both body and mind. The child was learning resilience through experience, discovering that the life of a prodigy required strength beyond skill alone. Through all this, he held on to the love for music that had started it all. Even when exhausted or frustrated, he returned to the piano with eagerness, seeking the joy of creation. He experimented with melodies, explored improvisation, and sometimes simply played for the sound itself. These moments reminded him that, despite the pressures, Music was not only about recognition or success, it was about expression, emotion, and connection. The piano remained a companion, a teacher, and a refuge. As part 3 of his journey unfolded, the child understood that being a prodigy meant living in 2 worlds simultaneously, one of admiration, competition, and high expectation, and one of personal growth, emotion, and discovery. Each day brought new lessons, challenges, and triumphs. He learned that talent was a gift, but it required discipline, resilience, and self-awareness. He realized that success was not only about skill, but about balance, mental strength, and the ability to navigate both pressure and joy. And through it all, the piano remained at the center of his life, guiding him, challenging him, and inspiring him to continue on a path that was as beautiful as it was demanding. By now, the child had been immersed in music for several years. The life of a prodigy was no longer a novelty. It was a routine, a demanding one that shaped every moment of his days. Yet, despite the growing accolades and recognition, he began to feel the weight of constant expectation more deeply. The pressure to perform flawlessly, to exceed past achievements, and to impress judges and audiences became a persistent companion. What once felt like a joyful exploration of sound now carried an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that talent was both a blessing and a burden. Each practice session was intense. Hours were spent perfecting difficult pieces, repeating passages until the smallest imperfections disappeared. His fingers ached at times. His wrists and arms complained, and fatigue occasionally blurred his focus. Yet he persisted, driven by an inner compulsion to improve and by the awareness that the world watched closely. Even a minor lapse in concentration could lead to errors that, in competitions or performances, were noticed by everyone. This realization brought a mix of determination and anxiety, a combination that was difficult for anyone, let alone a child, to manage. Social life had become almost non-existent. School was attended, but often the mind was elsewhere, on the next recital or practice assignment. Friends invited him to join games or outings, but he declined politely, unable to free himself from his obligations. Loneliness sometimes crept in, a quiet reminder of what he was missing. Birthdays, celebrations, and carefree moments seemed like distant experiences, enjoyed only in imagination. Yet there was no resentment, only a recognition that the path he was on required sacrifice. Competitions became even more challenging. Each one introduced more complex pieces and higher standards. Audiences expected brilliance, judges expected precision, and the child expected perfection from himself. Mistakes, even small ones, were magnified in his mind, replayed endlessly in quiet moments. Anxiety occasionally surfaced, especially before important performances. Sleep became restless on nights before competitions, filled with rehearsed passages, imagined errors, and the desire to meet expectations. Parents noticed these moments and tried to offer comfort, but the pressure remained, a constant companion he could not escape. His teacher continued to demand more than technical skill. She emphasized expression, emotion, and interpretation. Each piece was not only about notes and rhythms, but about conveying a story, a feeling that could touch an audience. The child sometimes struggled to find the emotional depth required, feeling frustrated when a piece did not communicate as vividly as he wished. Yet these challenges were also opportunities, moments where growth and understanding could flourish. Slowly, he learned to explore music in ways beyond technical execution, discovering subtlety, nuance, and the power of personal expression. Health became a concern. The intensity of practice, coupled with stress and long hours, sometimes led to fatigue and tension. Parents monitored him carefully, encouraging proper posture, regular breaks, and sufficient rest. They recognized that nurturing talent required balance, that the pursuit of excellence without care could lead to burnout. The child, while deeply committed, began to notice the signs of strain. He occasionally experienced discomfort, mental fatigue, and emotional tension. These moments were reminders that being gifted came with responsibilities beyond music alone. Emotional struggles intensified. There were days when the child felt overwhelmed by expectations, by the constant need to improve, and by the awareness of his own limitations. Tears sometimes came after long practice sessions, after small mistakes, or after moments when music felt less like joy and more like obligation. In these times, he leaned on the support of family, teachers, and trusted mentors. Conversations were rare but meaningful, offering reassurance and reminding him that even prodigies were still children, capable of feeling vulnerability, frustration, and doubt. The world of prodigies was competitive and isolating. Other children with extraordinary talent appeared on the scene, sometimes as friends, sometimes as rivals. Comparisons were inevitable, and the child sometimes questioned his own abilities in light of others' accomplishments. He watched some peers excel effortlessly while others struggled, noticing the varied ways talent and pressure affected each young musician. These observations taught him that success was not only about skill, but about resilience, emotional intelligence, and the ability to endure both challenge and expectation. Despite these difficulties, moments of triumph and joy persisted. Private sessions of improvisation allowed the child to rediscover music as a personal language, free from judgment or evaluation. He explored melodies and harmonies spontaneously, expressing emotions that words could not capture. These moments reminded him of why he loved music in the first place, reinforcing the idea that while public performance was important, personal connection to sound and rhythm was equally vital. Improvisation became a refuge, a space where creativity and emotional freedom could flourish. The child began to understand the dual nature of his journey: the public world of competitions, audiences, and acclaim, and the private world of discovery, expression, and personal satisfaction. Each day required careful navigation between these realms, balancing effort and rest, performance and exploration. He learned that the life of a prodigy was not simply about talent or recognition, but about understanding limits, nurturing passion, and maintaining emotional health. A particularly challenging period came when the child faced consecutive competitions with increasingly complex requirements. Each performance demanded precision, interpretation, and stamina. Travel, rehearsals, and preparations filled every moment, leaving little room for relaxation. Stress accumulated, and the child experienced moments of doubt and frustration. Yet he persevered, drawing strength from the knowledge that each challenge was an opportunity to grow and refine both skill and character. Family played a central role in supporting him through these demanding times. Parents provided emotional encouragement, guidance, and practical assistance. They recognized the unique pressures he faced and offered moments of respite, suggesting walks, quiet evenings, or breaks from practice. These interludes, though brief, were essential in maintaining balance and reminding the child that life encompassed more than music alone. They reinforced the idea that talent was precious, but emotional and physical well-being were equally important. School remained a background presence, a place where the child interacted with peers but often felt separated by the demands of his talent. Friends admired him, sometimes felt distant, and occasionally envied his abilities. The child navigated these relationships with care, appreciating companionship while understanding the limits imposed by his schedule. He learned that connection required effort, patience, and understanding just as much as mastering a challenging piece of music required focus, dedication, and skill. Through all of this, the child's relationship with his teacher evolved. The teacher continued to push for excellence, but also recognized the need for balance, guidance, and emotional support. Lessons became not only about technique and performance, but about understanding music, emotion, and self-awareness. The teacher emphasized that true mastery involved not just skill, but the ability to endure pressure, navigate challenges, and remain passionate despite obstacles. The child began to internalize these lessons, realizing that resilience was as crucial as talent. The child also encountered moments of doubt regarding his own future. He questioned whether he could sustain this intensity, whether he truly enjoyed music under constant scrutiny, and whether the path of a prodigy was the right one for him. These reflections were natural, a sign of emotional growth and self-awareness. The child learned to express these thoughts quietly, often through music itself, channeling uncertainty into sound, rhythm, and creativity. Public performances remained both exhilarating and stressful. Audiences applauded, judges praised, and recognition grew, yet the child remained aware of the expectations surrounding him. Each performance was a test, not only of skill but of endurance, focus, and emotional expression. Mistakes were inevitable, and he learned to navigate them with grace, understanding that imperfection did not diminish value or ability. These experiences deepened his resilience and fostered a growing maturity beyond his years. Health continued to require attention. Parents monitored physical well-being, posture, and rest, emphasizing the importance of balance. The child began to recognize the necessity of self-care, understanding that talent alone could not sustain performance or happiness. Moments of fatigue or discomfort served as reminders that physical and emotional well-being were integral to sustaining the journey. He began to listen to his body and mind, integrating care into the rhythm of practice and performance. By this stage, the child's understanding of music had deepened significantly. He explored nuances in tone, tempo, and dynamics, experimenting with interpretation and improvisation. Music became both a challenge and a means of self-expression. He learned that beyond technical skill, understanding and emotional connection were essential. Each note played carried meaning, and each performance became an opportunity to communicate something uniquely his own. This realization reinforced his commitment to both excellence and personal expression. Travel and performances also offered exposure to different cultures, audiences, and experiences. Each new setting taught him about the universality of music, its power to move and connect people. Yet every trip also brought new challenges: fatigue, unfamiliar environments, and the pressure to perform. The child learned to adapt, to maintain focus despite changing circumstances, and to find moments of joy and inspiration even amid difficulty. These experiences broadened his perspective, shaping both his musical ability and emotional resilience. Friendship and connection remained complex. The child valued peers and fellow musicians, but his schedule and dedication often limited social interaction. He learned to cherish meaningful relationships, recognizing that quality, not quantity, was most important. Shared experiences with fellow young musicians provided understanding and camaraderie, reinforcing that talent could connect people even in the midst of isolation. These relationships offered support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging, essential in navigating the demands of prodigious life. By the time the child reached the final stage of this journey, the piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a part of his life, his identity and his way of understanding the world. Years of dedication had shaped him, not only as a musician but as a person. He had faced challenges, pressure, and moments of doubt, but he had also experienced triumph, joy, and growth. Now he was beginning to see the fruits of all his effort in a way that was both rewarding and enlightening. Performances continued, but there was a noticeable shift in the child's approach. Earlier, each recital had been dominated by the pursuit of perfection and approval. Now there was a deeper understanding of music as an expression of emotion and thought. He no longer focused solely on technical mastery. He played to communicate, to connect with listeners, and to convey meaning beyond the notes on the page. Audiences noticed the difference, sensing a depth and maturity that was remarkable for someone his age. Parents watched with a mixture of pride and relief. The child, while still dedicated, had learned to manage the pressures that had once threatened to overwhelm him. He took breaks when needed, balanced practice with other activities, and maintained a sense of joy in playing. The family reflected on the journey, recognizing both the sacrifices and the triumphs. They had seen the transformation from a curious young boy discovering the piano to a thoughtful, resilient musician who understood both the demands and the rewards of his talent. Mentors and teachers continued to guide him, but their role had shifted. Instead of focusing primarily on correction and instruction, they now emphasized refinement, interpretation, and personal growth. The child engaged in lessons with a sense of purpose and awareness, eager to explore new dimensions of music while respecting the foundation of skill and discipline he had built. These sessions were collaborative, creative, and filled with opportunities for discovery, rather than mere repetition or critique. Social interactions improved as well. With increased confidence and a better understanding of balance, the child began reconnecting with peers. Friendships, once strained by lack of time and attention, found new footing. The child discovered that he could share his experiences, teach others about music, and participate in activities outside the piano without compromising his dedication. This newfound equilibrium reinforced the importance of balance in life, a lesson as valuable as any musical technique. A pivotal moment came during a major performance, one that symbolized both the culmination of years of effort and the beginning of a new phase. The hall was filled with people eager to hear the child play. He sat at the piano feeling both excitement and calm. As he played, every note reflected not only technical skill but emotion, understanding, and personal expression. The audience was captivated, sensing the authenticity behind each phrase. This performance was not just about recognition. It was a demonstration of growth, resilience, and the ability to merge skill with heart. After the performance, the child experienced a profound sense of accomplishment. There was pride, yes, but also a deep understanding that the journey was ongoing. Talent had brought him to this point, but perseverance, balance, and emotional growth had allowed him to flourish. Parents, teachers, and peers celebrated, recognizing not only the skill displayed but also the maturity and self-awareness that accompanied it. For the child, this was a moment of quiet reflection, a time to appreciate the path traveled and the lessons learned. In private moments, the child continued to explore music freely. Improvisation, composition, and experimentation became central to his relationship with the piano. He understood that music was not only about performing for others, but also about personal discovery and expression. These sessions were deeply satisfying, allowing him to connect with emotions, ideas, and stories in ways that words could not capture. It was a reminder that despite years of discipline and expectation, the essence of music, the joy of creation, remained intact. Health and well-being were now carefully managed. The child maintained routines that balanced practice, rest, social interaction, and recreation. Parents emphasized the importance of listening to his body and mind, reinforcing that talent required care, not only effort. The child had internalized this lesson, recognizing that long-term success and happiness depended on nurturing both skill and self. This understanding brought a sense of control and freedom, allowing him to enjoy music without fear of burnout or exhaustion. Competitions and public performances continued to offer opportunities, but the child approached them with a healthier perspective. Success was still important, yet he no longer felt defined by accolades or recognition. Each performance was a chance to express, to explore, and to connect with audiences, rather than a measure of self-worth. This shift in mindset transformed the experience, making it both less stressful and more fulfilling. Audiences responded, sensing the authenticity and emotional depth in each note. Mentors often commented on the child's growth, noting not only his technical skill but his resilience, creativity, and emotional intelligence. They remarked on the ability to convey meaning through music, to balance dedication with joy, and to navigate challenges with maturity beyond his years. The child absorbed these observations quietly, recognizing that the journey was ongoing. Each lesson, each performance, and each moment of reflection contributed to both musical and personal development. Friendships flourished as well. Peers began to see him not only as a talented musician, but as a person capable of connection, understanding, and shared experiences. The child learned to navigate social dynamics, balancing time spent with friends and time dedicated to practice. He discovered the joy of companionship, the value of shared laughter, and the importance of support networks. These relationships enriched his life, reinforcing the idea that talent was part of a larger, interconnected human experience. As the child matured, so did his understanding of music and its role in life. He explored composition, creating original pieces that reflected personal experiences, emotions, and imagination. Improvisation allowed him to communicate freely, experimenting with style, tone, and rhythm. These creative pursuits were deeply fulfilling, offering a sense of ownership and individuality that complemented structured learning and performance. Music had become a language, a way to express complex feelings, and a bridge to connect with others. The family watching this evolution felt a mixture of pride, relief, and admiration. The child had endured challenges, pressures, and moments of doubt, yet emerged resilient, passionate, and balanced. The journey had not been easy, but it had cultivated not only talent but character, self-awareness, and emotional depth. Parents reflected on their role, recognizing both the support they had provided and the lessons learned along the way. They understood that guiding a prodigy required patience, understanding, and the willingness to allow the child to grow at his own pace. A significant milestone came when the child was invited to perform at a prestigious event, one that showcased emerging talents on a larger stage. The preparation was intense yet different from before. Now the child approached it with confidence, balance, and a deeper understanding of music's purpose. Each rehearsal was both disciplined and exploratory, allowing him to refine skill while maintaining the joy of expression. When the day arrived, he played with mastery, conveying emotion, narrative, and technical brilliance seamlessly. The audience responded with genuine appreciation, moved not only by skill but by authenticity. Following this performance, the child reflected on the journey. He realized that the path of a prodigy was not simply about talent, competition, or recognition. It was about growth, understanding, and balance. He had learned that dedication required discipline, resilience, and emotional awareness. He understood that talent alone could not sustain a fulfilling life. Care, perspective, and self-awareness were equally important. Music remained central, but it was now part of a broader understanding of life, relationships, and personal fulfillment. The child continued to explore music in private, balancing public performance with personal discovery. He experimented with composition, improvisation, and interpretation, finding joy in creative expression. These sessions reinforced the connection between discipline and freedom, skill and emotion. Music was not only a path to recognition but a personal language, a way to communicate and understand the world. The piano had become both a companion and a teacher, offering lessons in artistry, patience, and self-discovery. Friendships, family relationships, and mentorships remained vital. The child learned to appreciate support, understanding, and shared experiences. He recognized that success was not achieved in isolation, and that guidance, companionship, and emotional care were essential components of growth. The journey of a prodigy was enriched by these connections, reinforcing the human side of talent and achievement. In the quiet of his room, the child would sometimes sit at the piano and reflect. He thought about the early days, the excitement of discovery, the challenges of practice, the pressures of performance, and the moments of doubt and triumph. Each memory was a reminder of how far he had come, of the lessons learned, and of the depth of understanding he had gained. He realized that the journey was ongoing, that growth never truly ends, and that music would continue to be a source of learning, expression, and connection. Parents watched with pride as the child navigated this stage with grace and maturity. They understood that nurturing talent was a complex task, requiring balance between encouragement and understanding, between discipline and freedom. They had witnessed both the challenges and rewards, and they recognized the resilience, passion, and depth that had developed over the years. The child's journey had been extraordinary, not only in terms of skill but in the cultivation of character, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. As this part of the journey concluded, the child had come to embody the essence of a true musician, disciplined yet expressive, talented yet humble, dedicated yet balanced. He had faced the pressures of expectation, the challenges of performance, and the demands of skill, yet emerged with a sense of joy, purpose, and understanding. Music had shaped him, challenged him, and guided him towards self-discovery. It had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of balance. And most importantly, it had allowed him to grow not only as a musician but as a human being, capable of navigating the complexities of life with grace, curiosity, and heart. Throughout Part 4, the child's journey was marked by growth, challenge, and introspection. He learned that the life of a prodigy was not only about talent, but also about resilience, balance, and self-awareness. Each day presented opportunities to refine skill, deepen understanding, and cultivate emotional strength. Music remained a source of joy and expression, a constant companion and teacher. Yet the journey also required navigating pressure, expectation, and occasional isolation. As this stage of his story drew to a close, the child was more aware of the complexities surrounding talent. He recognized that success required not only ability, but endurance, patience, and self-care. Public recognition, applause, and awards were gratifying, yet the true journey was personal, rooted in emotional growth, understanding, and the love for music itself. The piano remained central to his life, a source of challenge, joy, and self-discovery, guiding him through a path that was both demanding and profoundly rewarding.